Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and of course Elden Ring. With the patch of 1.09 and technically 0.1 as well, we want to take a look at how things stand now with those universal Ashes of War. What are 10 fantastic options in this patch going forward to work builds around or work into builds? These are going to be my top 10 picks for power and variety. I will reference some obvious comparisons between a couple, but overall these are some of my favorite Ashes of War to recommend to you guys. We begin of course at number 10 with the early game beast of UNSHEATHE. A very simple Ash of War that you can actually start the game with the Samurai class. It's basically the Moonveil Ash of War without the Moonveil magic aspect to it, making it obviously much weaker, but that does not mean it is weak. This is incredibly strong in the early games for when you're playing in the open world or just dealing a nice hit for a punish window in a boss fight. Thanks to its nice damage and staggering power, it is a very reliable source of damage, and one that is easy to get and run with your katanas or otherwise. Due to how just from the ground up it's just a very strong, straightforward ability, I think it deserves an acknowledgement because I do think as a universal Ash of War, it is one of the, if not arguably, the best in the game. Now we just need to give it some sort of magic ranged aspect to it, which it is, of course, in the shape of Moonveil. With that quickly said though, let's get to an interesting one with the Spectral Lance at number 9. Glancing at this, you might not think it's as strong and as universally useful as I think it is. We're talking about something that takes less than 10 FP to use per use and has really high poise per hit. It finds itself in a very good place in this patch as a really good utility in any build that can run it. It's an interesting one because, for example, you can use it at really long range, but you can make that much longer using the arrow talisman to increase the range of that. Because of how quick it comes out, it's a reliable, spammable way to deal damage at range, especially in any boss fight or open world scenario where you can make use of the ridiculous range that it has. With that, the tracking is incredible to make sure you actually land those hits. So even if you are using it at those ridiculous extended ranges, it allows still for weak spot focusing, like say heads or eyes on certain enemies, causing those knockdowns and staggers. There are some negatives to it though, like the fact that you used to be able to buff its damage a little bit with the Black Flame Blade buff, but that seems to be removed now, much like the Blood Flame Blade buffing Ashes of War for range bleed. Or the fact that this is obviously one that works on spears and halberds specifically, so it's a bit of a hard one to get a hold of. Overall, I do think it's meant more for a utility in a build rather than being, say, the basis of all of your damage like I'm just trying to do in this footage, working as a really great long-range harass or stagger or knockdown creator, which is incredibly useful in an open world game such as this. Moving forward, number 8, a bit more of a generic one, we have the Royal Knight's Resolve as a great option for any big hitters, those that want to deal a lot of damage in one hit. Just buff up and then for like the next 8 seconds, you have an extra increased damage hit, and this works with something like Giant's Crusher with its unique heavy attack where you do the front flip slam, dealing extra damage through that. Any build that can benefit from enhancing a single hit is obviously going to want Royal Knight's Resolve because it just does that and does that so efficiently. You'll see it occasionally in PvP, and it's very consistent in strength builds in PvE. There isn't much more to say about it, it's still very good. Next is Ice Spear, which works as an ice shot of really good damage, and of course is brilliant on the Clayman's Harpoon, which we talked about recently on the channel. Interestingly, this Ash of War actually has a up-close sort of point-blank hit, where you chip out some damage and deal some ice build-up to anything that's near to you. Then you have the follow-up main event, where you stab forward and thrust, sending forward that Ice Spear itself. Not an overly long range compared to, say, Spectral Lance, but medium to close range, and a nice burst of damage as well, again, as that ice build-up. With the damage being very, very respectable, you can entirely rely on just this as your source of damage in, say, PvE. It works okay in trading in PvP, thanks to that chip damage, maybe staggering those with lower poise, or surprising someone who's low, not expecting it to finish them off. So overall, it's a solid option, and makes the Clayman's Harpoon particularly good. Next up at number 6 though, we have the Flaming Strike, which has really overshadowed the Flame of Redmane, which used to be kind of the winner of the fire Ash of War attacks. That was nerfed pretty damn heavily, and now Flaming Strike finds itself in a really good place, so much so that I fairly often actually see it in PvP, and it is quite hard to deal with. We're talking about a double combo where you send out a sort of medium to close range fire spread, and then you can follow that up with another strike, dashing forward and dealing a strike with your weapon, which will now light your weapon on fire, now giving it a fire damage source. As a source of fire in any build, suddenly that's great because so many enemies in this game are vulnerable or weak to fire, or like mega CCable because of the fire damage. Back in 1.07, this was buffed to have better attack power, increased duration of the buff, and attack power that is granted by the fire attribute, and also say the recovery, the delay between different actions, that was greatly specifically reduced. So it's working just real smooth, real satisfying. So just like that, 7 and 6 Ice and Fire Ashes of War options for you to consider. But now another fire option at number 5, Eruption, which I think is a bit of a sleeper hit Ash of War. That's why it's so high up on this list. Direly underrated since it's buffed back in 1.07. We recently made a whole build with this Ash as the core of it. Eruption has you do both a downward and upward slam, and also leaves behind a pool of lava. Back in 1.07, it had increased range and duration of that lava. They added a hitbox part to the attack when the weapon is slammed, so up close it's very deadly. And they also fixed the timing of poise during the activation, giving it basically really good, essentially hyper armor for trading. This is best used with a big heavy hitting weapon for further poise and stagger and trading opportunity, so you're able to spam this back to back with incredible poise, allowing for pretty hilarious and effective trading while you blast damage and stagger foes with it. Due to the changes of 1.09 though, to say great axes, hammers, swords and more, there's a lot of great options to run this Ash of War on in very effective ways. In our build though, we combined a great axe, the Omen Killer Cleaver, with this Ash, and Bloodflame Blade to skyrocket the damage, dealing big raw damage, bleed build up, and fire with the weapon buff and the lava combined. All of this again is benefiting from the very high poise that protects you to ensure that it actually goes off in full over and over. With the better speed, range and recovery of axes as well in this case, it will reach further and recover faster using this weapon, so it made for a great combination overall. I've been very impressed by the Ash of War, and I felt that it needed to be talked about in this list. But moving up now to number 4, it's Stormblade, which you could compare to, say, Beast Roar, which also deserves at least a mention in this list. But I think due to the buff of 1.07, Stormblade wins out over Beast Roar. Basically what happened there is they increased the motion speed and range of the blade. So it comes out quicker, it goes further, it's very effective because of that. It's cheap and effective, so you can absolutely spam it, dealing great range damage. The thing is, they also added damage detection to the weapon part, so you can do it point blank, and when you do so, it basically doubles up as the Ash hitting and your weapon hitting, and if you have any status or build up or benefit from that, it becomes pretty insane, especially buffed up with, say, Bloodflame Blade. They also reduced the delay between the end of various actions, so it comes out a lot smoother, and you're also stuck in it a lot less time. This is how it combos into itself so effectively with how fast it comes out now, and with the right weapons, of which there are a good amount that can use this, it is really, really effective up close or far, and I find it very fun to use in both PvE and PvP for that reason. In fact, while I'm just running around gathering things and getting footage, often it's the Ash of War I rely on most because it's so smooth and effective, straightforward. So I think it's fantastic, and that's why it's number 4. But above that, we of course have like the giants. Firstly, number 3, Seppuku. The fact is, the DPS potential of this Ash of War is still simply stupid. It is incredible, even if it takes up, yeah, a while to buff and also costs a lot more health than it used to, and it doesn't give you as much like power as it used to, but you still, to this day, can't ignore the output that it can have when it gets going, especially with power stance weapons just staggering and stabbing into things. Ultimately, the bleed buildup is crazy. Still, the AIR benefits are still very good. Ridiculously good Ash of War. There's just actually downsides to using it that you have to play around, and that's good because it makes it a lot more balanced, and so we don't see Seppuku spam quite nearly as much in every PvP duel like we used to. I would say it certainly has a lot more use in PvE, where you're able to deal with the negatives a lot easier, say prepping before a fight starts and just healing up. So yeah, Seppuku still kind of nuts, but a lot more fair and effective. Number 2 above that, I think, is a more reliable one without the many downsides of Seppuku. It's Giant's Hunt. Another comparison here could be Lion's Claw. These two are very similar in use. Ultimately, Giant's Hunt is my preferred one though, with its really high poise damage. It is super good in PvE against bosses, causing staggers and big hits, where sometimes you might just want to do another Giant's Hunt instead of, say, taking that critical hit that you've just earned. Whether you're in PvE or PvP, it's going to hit like an absolute truck. I'm seeing numbers to this day, I tested it today, over 1,000, 1,200 in a single Ash of War use. That can kill certain builds, like the squishier ones, or nearly kill most other builds. A single hit dealing that much damage just by pressing one button is pretty ridiculous. Of course, you must time it and carefully aim it, but it does have a sort of mini gap closer aspect to it when it jumps forward, so it's still very good there. Any big weapon, any weapon that can use it, even spears and such, is fantastic. But above that, at number 1, I think is just the highest bleed DPS potential for a universal offensive Ashe in the game. That is Bloodblade. In 1.07, it was buffed heavily, increasing its power and damage, adding the damage detection to the weapon part, so up close it double hits, and also of course the reduced delay between the end of various actions, meaning you don't get stuck in it and you can combo into itself much more smoothly. So yeah, the damage since then has been really high just per use. The bleed build-up has been very good. The fact that there's a damage detection on the weapon part means you can press yourself against an enemy with a bleed weapon, hit with the Ashe and the weapon and the bleed status of the weapon, and basically just suddenly pop someone in 1 or 2 uses in PvP, or just reliably one of the highest bleed potential options for an offensive Ashe in the game, as I've said. There's only one Ashe that outshines it in this way, and that's the unique weapon art of Reduvia's Bloodblade, which does all of the same things, it just doesn't cost health to use per. And that's the main downside of this Ashe of War Bloodblade, is that it does cost a small amount of health per use, so you must manage that and just heal every now and then, or get like a heal over time. But despite that negative, it's still incredibly high bleed-based DPS with this Ashe of War, and as a universal option, it fits into so many bleed-based builds. Dagger, katana, or whatever other bleed-based weapon you're going for. If it can use Bloodblade, that is obviously an incredible option. But there you go, that is my list of pretty much the 10 varied Ashes of War, the universal Ashes of War that I could recommend to you. And to be honest, there's a lot more I would have talked about in this video if we weren't limiting it to just 10, but there's always the tier list to come back to later on in this patch. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.